Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Weekly Walk. I'm your host, Joshua Ingram. It is Monday, November 7th, year of our Lord 2022, and this is episode number 76. I'm pretty sure I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I was just thinking about it fresh. And so I wanted to bring it up again. If it's something you've already heard me talk about, feel free to skip this section. And I'll keep it real brief. But I'm reading a book by George Ladd on the tribulation period, the rapture theory. Um, a while back, so just to give you some context, why I'm reading it really. When I first got saved, I got saved in the midst of the Left Behind series being written. Like a few of the books were already out, and then like new ones were being written and released on a yearly basis almost, or maybe it was even quicker than that. I'm not sure, but I remember that I was really interested in them and read them with passion. You know, I would get so excited waiting for the next book to come out, because I when I first got saved, I was persuaded that we were living in the last days, and that we were the last generation, and we would live to see the return of the King. And so I really, really wanted to understand the book of Revelation, which is a very complex book. It's hard to it's not written in plain, straightforward language like the rest of scriptures. It's written in visions and um, um, visual word pictures that are hard to explain. So that being the case, there's multiple different interpretations out there on what Revelation means or how to read it, and it just, if you hear other opinions about it, it just convolutes the issue. But unfortunately, when I was young in the faith, that's what I did. I wanted to understand it so badly that when I found this Left Behind series, I thought it made sense, and I was like, wow, this really clarifies the book of Revelation. It makes everything make sense, and it was written in a fun, like almost like Mission Impossible, James Bond type style. It was just a fun book to read. And so after reading those, I thought I had it all figured out. You know, I thought I understood the chronology and the different events that were going to take place and whatnot. But again, I read those as a baby Christian with no understanding. Fast forward a couple years, I'm in the Word on a daily basis, reading the Word for myself, studying the Word. I still have um, this desire in my heart to understand end times. I still have this belief that we're living in the last days. Like that was one of my early passions in the faith, and so I'm often thinking about that as I'm reading the scriptures. But now I'm studying them on my own, apart from this Left Behind series, and I start to realize that this whole idea of a secret rapture prior to the tribulation events just is not biblical. It's not in the scriptures. That it's nowhere to be found. And so I'm studying that out, and that led me down a whole rabbit trail of. Then I started wondering, like, well, if this isn't clearly taught in the scriptures, because it's not. It's the secret rapture is not in the Bible. So then I immediately started thinking, why do so many people believe it then? How come pretty much every Christian I come across believes in this? Where are they getting it from? Where is this teaching coming from? Why is it so permeated throughout the church? And so I ended up studying that a lot, and found that it was a Jesuit conspiracy. Traced it back to like the Schofield Bible, C.I. Schofield, in the 50s, and then he traced that back to the Plymouth Brethren movement in England, with John Nelson Darby and oh, what was the other guy's name? I can't remember right now off the top of my head, but I traced it back to that in the late 1800s, this Brethren movement. and that it was based on some little girl supposedly speaking in tongues and having visions. And then I also found that the guy who, Irving, that was his name, Irving, with the Plymouth Brethren movement, he was so heavy into this because he had discovered a book written by Rabbi Ben Ezra about the coming of the Lord, and it had this future Antichrist figure and this whole futurism idea. But this book was Rabbi Ben Ezra was actually a pen name, I discovered, and his real name was Ribera, or I think that was it. I'm talking off of memory here from something I researched years ago, but it was like Francisco Ribera or something like that. He was a Jesuit priest who wrote this book knowing that Protestants would not accept it if they knew it was coming from a Jesuit. So he was deceptive and wrote it under this pen name. He figured if it was written by a converted Jew, the Protestants would be all over it. So he wrote it under this pen name, Rabbi Ben Ezra. But then from there, I traced it back to you get into the whole futurism idea, which versus preterist idea versus like a kind of ongoing revelation. Preterism teaches that like Revelation, all the end times prophecies were fulfilled in 70 AD in like a spiritual manner. I think I haven't looked too much into it because I always just dismissed it as nonsense. Like the main thing that dissuades me, is that a word? Dissuade instead of persuade, dissuades. The thing that deters me from believing in preterism is that when Jesus talked about the end times and the tribulation that would accompany it, he said that it would be so bad, it would be worse than anything the world has ever seen or ever will see. And the events in 70 AD, although tragic, you certainly can't say that's the worst it's ever been. Plus, in Thessalonians, Paul talked about how the end wouldn't come until the man of sin was revealed and the great falling away had occurred. So again, and on top of that, the book of Revelation was written by the Apostle John when he was on the island of Patmos, and he didn't even write it until 90-something AD. So he wrote it after the events of 70 AD. So the preterism is foolishness to me, so I dismiss it. And then you start thinking about so basically I do subscribe to futurism. I believe that the events of the book of Revelation are written specifically about the end times, about the tribulation period, about the time of Jacob's trouble, about this period of time that's going to happen at the end, when the beast system, this Antichrist devil rulership is over the world. But there's also, I feel like the truth lies somewhere in between, kind of, because I like I say, I believe Revelation is written that way. But when you talk about because the book of Revelation doesn't mention Antichrist. The name Antichrist gets applied to figures in the book of Revelation, and I don't know if it's accurate to apply it or not. While these figures are certainly Antichrist in nature, like the beast and the woman who rides the beast and the second beast and the false prophet. Of course, they're all very Antichrist, anti-Christian, but can you apply the phrase Antichrist, capital A, to them? I don't know. In the old and all throughout the New Testament, it's like you only find that phrase, I think, in the gospel, or not the gospel, but in 1 John, I think, where he talks about how there's a spirit of he says, like, you've heard that Antichrist is coming. Even now I tell you there are many Antichrists. And he talks about the spirit of Antichrist. So that phrase Antichrist gets applied to all these figures in the book of Revelation. It also gets applied to the man of sin in Thessalonians. It gets applied to the little horn in the book of Daniel. And I don't know if that's an accurate way to do that. I don't know if all those things are talking about the same thing. I believe the book of Revelation is mainly focusing on a beast system, not a central figure. It's focusing on a world worldwide Antichrist system, a new world order that is going to persecute Christians and enforce a worldwide global economy system in which everybody has to take a mark of allegiance to this system. A beast in the book of Daniel is defined as an empire, a world government. And so when Revelation talks about a beast, I believe it's talking not about a figurehead, but about a system. And that system will be Antichrist and will persecute Christians. And Revelation 17 says that it's a woman that rides the beast, a woman directing and controlling. And then Revelation 17 goes on to describe exactly who this woman is, and it describes it as a city. And there's the city on seven hills. It's Rome. It's the Roman Catholic institution that controls this beast, controls the New World Order system. So I believe Revelation is telling us about a Roman Catholic system that sets up a worldwide government that oversees or is the power behind, the driving force behind a new world order, a world government. And that's what Revelation is talking about. However, I do agree with a lot of before this futuristic. So I apologize. I'm kind of babbling here. There's like a whole ton of information in my head that I'm trying to synchronize and put in like a logical step-by-step process. But before futurism really became the view, the man of sin and the little horn and the Antichrist were identified as Roman Catholicism, as the Pope. That's what the Protestant Reformation believed. That's what Zwingli and Martin Luther and John Calvin and all those guys, up through the Whitfields and the Edwards and the Spurgeons, and they all believed through their study that the man of sin was Rome, and the little horn in the book of Daniel was Roman Catholicism, and the son of perdition was Rome, and its head, the Pope, whoever the current Pope is. And I believe that as well. I think that's incredibly accurate. I believe that that's one of the more clear things shown in scriptures, especially the little horn prophecy. If you go and read that and then compare the little horn with the history of Rome, with the formation of the Roman Church, it's pretty crazy. It's spot on. So I believe that Rome is if you want to give that title Antichrist to the man of sin, to the little horn, then Rome is the Antichrist. But I believe the book of Revelation is talking about a future new world order kingdom headed up by this Antichrist, headed up by this woman, the little horn. The woman, the little horn, the man of sin, the son of perdition are all the same. And it's Rome. So anyways, so through the study of this Rabbi Ben Ezra, I found that you could trace it even back further to another Jesuit priest in Martin Luther's time, the 1500s, whatever that was. I forget what his name was. I feel like it was similar to Ribera. It was like Riviera or something like that. I don't recall off the top of my head, but he came up with this idea because the Jesuits were upset that the Reformation was occurring. Popery, the Roman Catholic institution, was losing its power, was losing its influence over Europe. So when Rome took power, they called it the Dark Ages because the European nations were in darkness. They were ignorant people. They were illiterate. They were unlearned. There wasn't mass production of reading materials. The Bible wasn't readily available, and if it was written in Latin, so nobody could understand it. Through that, and through a continual process of corruption, through the influence of pagan mystery Babylon interbreeding with Christianity in the Catholic institution. You started to have this blasphemous beast system where they worshipped the golden chalice and the wafer and believed in things like purgatory and praying to dead saints and angels, and eventually Mary was turned into the Queen of Heaven and became co-mediatrix. All these blasphemous things that were introduced, like I say, through the interbreeding of mystery Babylon paganism, under the guise of Christianity. And because you had an ignorant populace, they went along with it. They were frightened and threatened that they would go to hell if they didn't follow the edicts of the Catholic Church or the Catholic institution. And so you had this dark age where nobody knew the truth, where they felt like they had to go to the priest to get the truth, and the priest would mislead them with this Babylonian mystery hybrid. And so and you had entire countries under the sway of Rome, because kings and queens and princes would also be held under this fear of hell, and believing that it was the Catholic institution that would send them to hell if they didn't do what they were told. So then you fast forward to the Reformation, and the Bible is readily available now, because the Muslims had invaded Eastern Orthodox Church, Constantinople, and forced Christians to flee for their lives. And so you had all these Greek Christians fleeing into Europe, and they were bringing with them the original Greek manuscripts. And so all of a sudden you had like Wycliffe and Zwingli, who had the Bible available to them for the first time, and other than the Latin Vulgate, and they start reading the real Bible, the original Greek manuscripts, and finding all these errors in the Catholic institution, finding that they had been deceived, that they had been lied to. And that's why the Reformation happened. You had all these men of God that had found the truth in the scriptures and were trying to reform the church. They were trying to work the errors out to get rid of it, and eventually they found it was too corrupt, and they just had to separate. But these men, through their studies of the scriptures, found that Rome was the Antichrist, that the seat of Pope was what was described as the man of sin, the son of perdition, the Antichrist. And the Jesuits, because of that, Rome lost its influence over the European nations. Kings and queens were no longer afraid of the Pope. They knew the truth of the light had come. They knew the truth. They knew that Pope had no power. He couldn't send them to hell. And so what did Popery do? What did Rome do? It fought back to get control. It maintained sway over certain nations, like when England broke off and it still had sway over Italy and over Spain, Portugal, and whatnot. That's why you get all these wars, because they would threaten these kings and queens that they still had rule over, like, hey, you need to fight for the faith. You need to go attack these heretics. And so, under this misleading and deception, you get all these wars and chaos. But at the same time, people are getting saved left and right, because by the miraculous providence of God, the printing press became available too. It was invented around that same time. So now Bibles, the real Bible comes into Europe, and the printing press is invented. And now there can be mass production of the Bible. And the Bible's getting into the hands of every regular Joe. And so people are being saved left and right. People are waking up. These countries are coming out of this darkness, and Rome is losing its influence, losing its power, and losing money, because they're getting all this money from their scams. Pay to get your family out of purgatory. That's what drove Martin Luther to nail his 95 thesis, and so you have all these events going on, and Rome's losing its power. So they start the Inquisition. That's what the Inquisition was about, where they would arrest and beat and torture Christians to renounce their faith and to submit to the Roman Catholic institution. If you look into like the Waldenses or other biblical communities that were slaughtered by Rome. I think Fox's Book of Martyrs estimates like 50 million Bible Christians were killed during this period, because they wouldn't acknowledge the power of Rome. Like Rome would come around and hold up their wafer and say, submit and admit that this is the actual body of Jesus Christ, or we'll kill you. And they wouldn't, if you're found with a Bible, we'll kill you. All these blasphemies that were done during the Inquisition. But Rome learned that they can't stop. The power of the gospel was spreading. Light had come, and people were being saved. And even though they threatened all this persecution and violence and murder, they were unable to stop this spread. So the Jesuits, which are like the secret society of Roman Catholicism, they're like the CIA of Roman Catholicism. The spies. If you look into like the Jesuit oath, it's pretty frightening. They take an oath that they'll murder, for Rome. And but they got together and they said, okay, how do we stop this? Because not only are we losing power, but these people are calling us out as the Antichrist. And so you have people all over Europe recognizing Rome is the Antichrist system. It's not Christianity. It is Mystery Babylon repackaged with Christian titles. It is an Antichrist religion. And so what they did was they sat down and they reinterpreted Daniel chapter 9, a prophecy about the first coming of Christ. Daniel chapter 9 verses 24 through 27, I believe, is an amazing spot on to the date prophecy about the coming of Jesus in 30 AD, 27 AD. It talks about how from the time to rebuild Jerusalem until the anointing of the Messiah would be 483 years. The command went forth in 457 BC. I believe that's recorded in Ezra. And then in 27 AD, Jesus was baptized. He was anointed, and he was identified by John as the Lamb who takes away the sin of the world. He was identified as the Messiah. God the Father spoke from heaven, and the Spirit descended on him, and that's recorded in Luke chapter 2, I believe. The date is given. It's 27 AD, exactly 483 years after the command to rebuild. So Daniel's prophecy is fulfilled to the date. And Jesus is anointed, and then Jesus preaches to the Jews. Their final week, their 70th week, but he's cut off in the midst of the week, not for himself, but for us. And he takes away sin. He takes away oblation. So, like that, if you read Daniel 9, that prophecy was fulfilled when Jesus came the first time. But what these Jesuits did was they reinterpreted that. They twisted it and said, no, this is a prophecy about a future coming Antichrist. And so basically what they said was Rome can't be Antichrist because Antichrist is future. So they took the attention off of Rome and placed it on some future Antichrist. And that deception has permeated Protestant faith until this day, where everybody's looking for some future Antichrist figure instead of looking at Rome and going, no, there's Antichrist right there. She's always been with us. She's just subdued right now because she doesn't have the power she once had. But she's working behind the scenes to regain that power. When you look at like the UN and the European Union and their submission to popery and how she's pulling strings behind the scenes, popery is still the Antichrist and is going to set up this beast system that the book of Revelation talks about. So it's the idea of futurism saying Antichrist is future is wrong, but the beast system is future. Antichrist is with us right now. Antichrist is the Vatican, is popery. Wow, I really went off on a tangent. I did not expect to go on there, but how does this all tie into the George Ladd book I'm reading? So like I say, I was led astray by the Left Behind series. I was straightened out by reading the scriptures. And then I did a deep dive study to figure out why people believe in the pre-trib rapture, and found that it's because of this deception that came through the Jesuits. That this whole future Antichrist deception came through the Jesuits, and then through so then you have William Irving in the Plymouth Brethren, finding this book by Ben Ezra, who had been influenced by this previous generations of Jesuits, and Irving buying into this idea of a future coming Antichrist. And then he's further deceived by these supposed prophecies and visions that are given to this little girl about a secret rapture that happens before Antichrist comes. And so then that gets spread throughout that Brethren movement, and then gets introduced into America through Darby and through C.I. Schofield and such, and so on and so forth, till today, where major seminaries and schools are teaching that philosophy, this Jesuit teaching, and this supposed prophecy of this little girl are now being taught. And so you have a whole generation of Christians where a vast majority of them believe in some future coming Antichrist, and they believe that we'll be raptured out of here before it happens. And so once I discovered all this, I started trying to piece together, okay, how would I identify myself then? I'm not a, I do believe in a literal 1,000-year period where Christ is coming back. And I believe that Christ will return and establish that 1,000 years. That his return is the mark that starts that 1,000 years. And so that would make me premillennial. But premillennial has this attachment with pre-trib, where if you say you're premillennial, most people would assume that you believe in this pre-tribulation rapture theory. And I don't. So I was like, well, where do I stand on that? I am pre-mill. I do believe that, the book of Revelation is occurring in real time in his future. And I believe in this, in a literal 1,000-year period that started when Christ literally physically returns to earth. So I'm not a-mill, I'm not post-mill, I am pre-mill, but I'm not pre-trib. And then it's like, okay, then this idea of when, and I would say like pre-wrath, post-trib, you got all these things, and like I never really knew how I fit into all this. And then I discovered what's called historical premillennialism, which I hadn't heard about. It's not something that's taught. What's most common is this dispensational premillennialism with the rapture, the secret rapture theory. This idea of historical premillennialism goes back to the first century church and says this is what the early church believed. They believed that Christ would return and establish his millennium. There was no thought of a rapture. There was no thought that we're going to escape tribulation. There was a thought that the world will progressively get worse and worse, and evil will wax worse and worse, and then persecution will grow, and will be persecuted and hated and killed and slaughtered worldwide, and then Christ will return and establish his millennium, and that's what I believe. So I was like, yeah, I got really excited to find out about historical premillennialism, and then I found that I believe my favorite teacher, Charles Spurgeon, believed this as well, and that made me even more excited. And then I found that I had heard that the best writer on the topic of our modern era is this George Ladd. And so I started reading. I read one of his books maybe a year or two ago, and now I'm reading another one. And wow, man, that was just like I say, I did not intend to say all that. I intended to talk about something completely different. And so I just gave you all that background just to bring you to this one point here, to tell you why I'm reading George Ladd. But as I'm reading George Ladd, my mind, of course, is thinking about end times. And so it led me back to this idea that I've frequently had, that I call the Sabbath Millennium theory. And so if you study the genealogies in the Bible, you find that Earth is approximately 6,000 years old. If you just read through the genealogies that are given and add up all the dates, you're going to come to 6,000, 6,500 years, something like that. And Usher wrote a book years and years and years ago, well, hundreds of years ago actually, where he placed the start date at 404 BC. And I think that's the most commonly accepted answer. The genealogies, they're hard to piece together. There's a few genealogies that skip a name or two, or don't give like precise dates. So it's really hard to get exact math. The best we can do is get a rough estimate. But I think most people accept Usher's estimate as probably the most accurate. And he puts creation at 4004 BC. That's when Adam and Eve were made. And so with that as our reference point, we're going to go 4004 BC. I had this idea based on the scripture saying that with the Lord, one day is like 1,000 years. And so I started thinking God created everything in 6 days. And then on the seventh day, he rested. And so if I take that day to 1,000-year period and I look at a human history, under the light of that analogy of the one day equaling 1,000 years, I can go, okay, if God created everything in 6 days and rested the seventh day, I find it interesting that the millennium, which is 1,000-year period mentioned in the book of Revelation, chapter 20, is a rest period. It's we're told in the scriptures that we can enter into Christ's rest. There's a rest that still awaits for us. We're going to rest. And the millennium is that rest. We're going into that millennium where there'll be no more war. Nations will turn their weapons into plows. If somebody dies at the age of 100, they're considered just an infant. It talks about how young children will play with snakes. The wolf and the lamb will lay down together, and Christ will rule on earth with a rod of iron. It'll be a time of peace, a time of rest. So that I look at that millennium period as the Sabbath. And so then if that's the seventh day, then I thought, well, if I calculate back, I find it pretty interesting. Because if 4004 was the start date, 4004 to 3004 BC would be day 1. 3004 BC to 2004 BC would be day 2. 2004 BC to 1004 BC would be day 3. 1004 BC to 4 BC, which is when Christ was born, would be day 4. And so when Christ is born, he's starting day 5 in this 1,000-year day analogy. And that gives even more emphasis and clarity to the idea when Jesus would talk about how we're in the last days. He would say, in these last days, or we're in the last days. And somebody could look at it and go, well, that was 2,000 years ago, and we're still here, so how could that be the last days? Well, if it's talking about the day 1,000-year analogy, 4 days had already occurred. There's only 3 left, so he was, in fact, in the last days. So 4 BC to 996 AD would be day 5. And then 996 to 1996 would be day 6, which would mean the 6 days are done. All that remains is the Sabbath, which would give added emphasis and urgency to the idea that we're living in the last days, that we truly are at the very end. If this Sabbath millennium theory is correct. And I think it's an interesting theory that you can excuse me, add to help you to add additional ammo, so to speak, if you're trying to prove that we're living in the last days, I would say you can look at Timothy and its description of society. You can look at the increase of earthquakes and famines and pestilence. You can look at the wars. You can look at the reformation of Israel in the 40s. You can look at the UN and the being set up and being a foundation for a new world order, for a beast system. You can look at the push for implantable microchips that can do our buying and selling. You can look at all those things. That you can look at the increase of travel and knowledge as prophesied in Daniel. All those things point to the idea that we're in the very, very end. Like we may be the last generation. And then I think this day, 1,000-year idea also adds to that. Because if 4004 was an accurate date, then 1996 should have been the end of day 6, and we should be in the Sabbath. Now, 4004, if my theory is correct, obviously isn't the right day. And I'm not date setting because nobody knows. All I'm saying is we're certainly towards the end. I think, I've started thinking like, well, 4004, maybe that's when time started, but maybe Adam and Eve were created 30, 40 years before that, maybe 100 years. Maybe it was 100 years before they actually ate from that tree, before they actually disobeyed God and brought death into the world. And so maybe the second law of thermodynamics, the winding down of things, the start of time, the start of decay, maybe that didn't occur for the first 100 years. Maybe Adam and Eve were perfected beings with no aging process until they ate. And so if that's the case, then we can set that prophetic clock back, 30, 40 years or whatever, and then 1996 wouldn't be the end date. 2026 would be the end date, or 2036, or however long. Nobody knows the day or the hour. All I'm saying is that it adds some validity to the idea that we're in the very, very last days. And I find it interesting that the New World Order people want to establish their New World Order by 2030, the Great Reset. So all these things, when you look at them all together, they're all what would be called in the court of law circumstantial evidence, but when taken all together as a whole, I think it shows that we very well could be the last generation. Yeah, so just some thoughts I wanted to share. I had a really good conversation with one of my brothers during our Bible study this morning regarding the issue of gluttony. And, it was heated. We were both vehemently presenting our points, but it was also very good, very edifying, I think. I think we were able to wrestle through our disagreements and come to somewhat of an understanding. I don't know if we're seeing exactly eye to eye on the subject now, but I was hoping I could recapture some of it here on the podcast. It was based in Proverbs 25. I think it's verse 16 or somewhere around there, that says basically, eat as much honey as is sufficient for you. And then it says something else there, I can't remember, but the point is, eat as much as sufficient for you. And so my idea was that I'm taking sufficient to mean satisfactory. Eating till you're satisfied. Eating until the word itself, I think, in the Strong's Concordance means enough. So eat as much as enough for you. And I take that to mean until you're satisfied. And I take it also to mean not just honey, but a general principle of eating till you're satisfied, eating till you're full. And I think that individuals have different full levels. Some people require more food to feel satisfied than others. Somebody who weighs 120 pounds going to feel satisfied or full or sufficient with maybe, a small plate of food. Whereas somebody my size, a big guy pushing 300 pounds, it's going to take 2 large plates for me to feel full, to feel satisfied. And so then the issue becomes, okay, well, where is gluttony then? And my one brother's definition of gluttony was to overeat, to eat in excess. And my issue with that definition is that it's vague. To eat in excess would be a different level for different people. There's not a clear black and white amount that you can point to and say, once you cross this line, you're in gluttony. And so, and we had previously discussed this issue, and I had always determined that gluttony is not just excessive eating, but it's like a greedy consumption. And after we went back and forth, I guess I was misusing the word greedy, because the idea I was using was not just it's mine. It was more of a careless or reckless eating. Just eating, man, how would I define that? It's, I guess it just a careless eating. It's devouring food for the sake of devouring, just like, I can eat as much as I want because blah blah blah. It comes down to a heart issue. It's a motive issue. And man, I'm doing a bad job of describing that. I can't remember what the term I used was, but basically my argument was that, okay, so I was trying to take this step by step with my brother, because he was just sticking with the overeating is gluttony. And I just kept coming back to, well, hold on now. First of all, show me the scriptures that point out gluttony. Show me where, because we hear about gluttony as one of the 7 deadly sins, but that's Roman Catholicism. That's not Bible. There's not 7 deadly sins in the Bible. All sins are deadly. And so I want, show me what the commandment is on gluttony. Show me the scripture that says gluttony is sinful. And there's not a direct verse on it. There's verses that speak about gluttony as being an unwise or unhealthy decision, but there's not a specific command against it. It says that gluttony leads to poverty, and that you should train your children to avoid gluttons and drunkards. But there's not a specific command that says, you shall not participate in gluttony, or do not, so that's step one. There's not a direct command against it. There's more of this principle of gluttony is an unwise, unhealthy behavior. It's something that should be avoided. It's something that, when done, will lead to poverty. So we can agree on that. And then the second step is, well, let's define then. So me and my brother, we're in agreement on that. Gluttony is it's an unwise thing to do. It's something that is unhealthy and unwise. And if you're looking to be a wise, healthy person, you should avoid it. So then the second step is, okay, well, let's define gluttony then. What does the word mean? And unfortunately, Strong's gives kind of a hard definition. It's an act of wind. It's described as a shaking, like when wind shakes, or a quaking, and then another definition was loose, as in a moral sense, loose morals. So it really has nothing to do with eating. I think there's context in the scriptures where, like, a riotous eater of flesh, and then the word glutton is used in that same scripture. But the definition itself, it is tricky, because what is meant by shaking wind or quaking or loose morals? And the image that came to my mind is like in the movies when you see a king at a banquet table and he's just piggishly eating, the drumstick and throwing it aside and grabbing a handful of mashed potatoes and just being a slob, and because he's being loose and careless with the food. It's not necessarily the overeating, it's the uncaring, just loose behavior with the food, just gorging himself without thought, just not caring about the food. Because if it's again, if we're going to define gluttony as overeating or excessive eating, then you have to define what over is or what excess is. And I think that's going to be different for every person. Like I pointed out to him, because the Proverbs are to train up children. So I was like, if you're training your child and your child's sitting at the table and he's eating 2 plates of food and he says, but Dad, I'm still hungry, are you going to deny him food and say, no, you can't have any because you would then be a glutton? I don't think that's what gluttony is. I think he is permitted to eat until he is satisfied. I think that's what the scriptures tell us. I think food is given to us as a gift from God to eat, drink, and be merry to the satisfying of our soul, that we are to eat until we're satisfied. Eat as much honey as is sufficient for thee. Eat for your enjoyment. Eat till you're satisfied. Eat till you're fulfilled. And I don't think anybody can tell anybody else, oh, you've overeaten now. I think the idea of gluttony comes down to your heart. It comes down to testing yourself to say, why am I eating more? Am I truly not satisfied? Do I really need some more food? Or am I just like carelessly consuming, or just excessively and without thought consuming? Am I greedily consuming because it's available? Like, oh, I got all this food, and just consuming it with this ravenous appetite that oh, it's mine, I get to eat, or stuffing yourself out of some impure motive. I would say that is what gluttony is to just, like, in my mind, I think gluttony is closer to when as Americans we go to a buffet and we fill a full plate of food, and then we take 2 bites of a thing and leave the rest to the trash. I think we're carelessly consuming food then. I think we're just being reckless with food, and I think that's probably closer to what gluttony is than just simply saying overeating. And I think the truth is probably somewhere in between, because I think overeating probably has some application there, because like my brother pointed out, and wisely so, he made a really good point that often gluttony is tied in with drunkenness. And so, in the same way that we would say drunkenness is an excess of wine, why wouldn't gluttony be an excess of food or something else? It doesn't necessarily have to be food. And so I think that when we tie the two together, that it's this reckless, careless, just almost like a brute beast attitude towards food tied in with overeating, we're probably getting close to what gluttony is. And so I guess the point I was ultimately trying to make was I don't think we can prescribe an idea of what we think overeating is and then try to bind that upon somebody else's consciousness and say, oh, if you eat this amount, you are a glutton. Because I think that there's people with different metabolisms, there's people with different sizes, and some people are not going to be satisfied with a small plate of food that would satisfy somebody else. And I think food has been given to us as a gift from God to enjoy and to our satisfaction, So I think if a meal is put before us, and we are worshipful to God for that meal and thankful and joyous over this gift that he has given to us, I think we are permitted to eat until we're satisfied. We're permitted to eat and as much as we see sufficient for us. And I think if we were to go beyond that for some reason, I don't know why a person would eat past their full point, but if there's some sort of just greed or pride or just like, I don't know, just if there's some reason to gorge yourself beyond, what has satisfied you, then I think we're passing into the gluttony thing. And again, I think the best example of that is if you're training your child, and he's sitting at the table and he's eating 2 plates and he says, "Dad, I'm still hungry." I don't think we would turn him away and say, "No, you can't have any more. You're a glutton." I think we would try to train our children to say, "Are you still hungry? Are you not satisfied?" And train them to appreciate food, to be thankful for food, to worship God in this great gift that he's given us, to not be reckless or careless with food, and to not eat beyond that full limit. My brother, was tying in a lot of health issues with it as well, which I think there's wisdom in that, but I think that goes beyond Scripture. I think a lot of the health problems we have and the reason there's a lot of obese, overweight people is not necessarily just because of overeating. I think it's because of the types of food that are being eaten. I think it's the processed junk food, the fast food, the sugary foods, things like that. And then also what's the word? The sedentary lifestyle, the lazy lifestyle, not getting enough. Because if you eat, let's say you're a person who eats 4,000 calories a day, and when you do, you're feeling satisfied. You don't feel like you're overeating. You're eating to your satisfaction level. If you eat 4,000 calories a day, but then you go and work out and you burn 2,500 calories, or during your day, you're putting in laborious work and you're burning off those calories, I think you're going to be a healthy person. I don't think you're going to be an overweight person. I don't think the amount of food you're eating has anything to do with it. I think if you're eating the right foods and you're getting the right exercise, those things are balanced out and you're going to be healthy. And as far as sin goes, I don't think there's any sin in eating until you're satisfied. I believe the sin comes in when there's something else added to it, where you're treating food as like this commodity that you have an excess of, and you can just be reckless and careless with it, and like just greedily consume it or whatever, So I don't know. It was an interesting conversation, just because, like I said, there was a lot of debate, a lot of heated debate, but I think when we slowed down and tried to say, okay, what are the verses on this? What do they say? What is the definition on gluttony? And then go from there. Let's define the term. Let's find the scriptures on it and see what it really says. And let's not try to add our own opinions or thoughts on it, or try to impose what I believe on another person. Let's just see what the scriptures say. Ultimately, it was a good conversation. Like I say, I don't know if we came to a complete agreement on it, but at least, it helped clarify some things in my mind, and hopefully in my brother's as well. But that's what I got on that subject. One of the things I've noticed in my faith is that no matter how much I'm struggling, no matter how disconnected I feel from the Lord, or how wore down and beat up I feel over my repetitive sin behaviors, or how distant I feel from God, or depressed or despondent, or whatever the case may be, my mind is continually moving forward, thinking about the kingdom and ways to serve the kingdom and ways to um, increase in holiness and ways to progress in this faith. And I guess that's what Paul was talking about when he talked about how he sees two laws at work in his body. And so with the one, the flesh desires to serve sin, the flesh desires to do sinful things, is doing what you don't want to do, in the mind and in the heart, but your flesh, just like an ox led to the slaughter, it's you sometimes just not fall in your body, you choose, but you have these behaviors, these addictions, so to speak, sinful things that draw you. And so he talked about how with his body he'll serve that law, but with his mind he'll serve Christ, because we have this duality of nature. We have this flesh body we're stuck in, but we have this inner man, um, that is always striving to serve Christ, striving for holiness, striving to walk in the ways of the Lord. And so, even like I say, even when I'm down, like, I'm not in a good spot spiritually speaking right now. I feel like I just fail over and over and over again in certain things, and um, it's wearisome, just wore out. But even then, in that, my mind is continually looking for ways to serve the kingdom. And so, I was thinking about, as we're getting closer to the new year, I I have no idea. It just, like, a spontaneous thought occurred to me. I was like, I wonder. So I got these 12 months. I'd like to focus on a different holiness attribute, a righteous attribute every month of next year. And so I was like, I should just get a calendar and I'll highlight like one characteristic per month, and then maybe put some verses, like for a verse a week for that month to really meditate on and to think about. And if it's on the calendar right in front of me, it'll cause me to continually think about these things. And so I was wondering, I thought to myself, like, how many fruits of the Spirit are there? And so I went to, what is it, Galatians 5, and looked that up, and it turns out there's 9. There's love, joy, peace, long suffering, um, goodness, meekness, temperance, faith. Um, I forget what else the other ones that are there, but there was 9 total. And so then I was like, all right, what are 3 others? And I just thought of 3 things that are on my mind a lot, 3 things that I find important, that I often desire to strive after. One being thankfulness, um, 2 being mercy, being merciful, and 3 being content. So with those, I had 12. And so my idea is, and then today I went through and I found, so I looked at the calendar and figured out how many weeks there are for each month, and then found a corresponding number of verses that focus on that particular attribute. So like with joy, I've got 5 verses or whatever it is, and then faith, 5 verses, and long suffering, and so on and so forth. Excuse me, I'm still getting over a head cold here, but so with that, I was thinking that, man, I'm hoping that this will be a good way. Like I say, I'm always trying to think in new ways to keep my mind on Christ. And um, with this calendar, starting in January, I'll have love. I think that's the first one. It's like love or joy. I can't remember, but and then starting January 1st, in that first week, I've got a verse on love that I'll write down, and just I'll look upon that and think about that, and meditate on that as I try to renew my mind and develop that fruit within me, to be more loving, to have these verses to encourage me and spur me on towards being more loving. And then February, you move on to joy, and the corresponding verses to think about and meditate, to focus on joy. and hopefully it'll help, because I really get disappointed with the lack of fruit in my life, or the lack of the maturity. Like the big one for me is temperance right now, because as I think about my life and the struggles I'm currently having, and the hardships that I've put myself into, it's because of a lack of temperance. There are things I should not be doing, and because I don't have self-control, I keep doing them, and it just brings me further and further down into this hole. And it's so discouraging and so wearisome. It's like, man, I I'm pleading with God, please give me temperance. Give me self-control, so that when I think about doing these things, I can have the self-control to say no, to say no, to resist the flesh, to resist that desire, because I'm so sick and tired of doing it, and so I'm hoping that through this meditation on the word throughout the next year, throughout the weeks, um, as I look at these verses on these particular characteristics, it'll help to develop this in me. Um, you know, that's my hope, anyways. So we'll see how it goes. All right, so that's what I got for you guys this week. As always, I truly appreciate you listening. I love you, and Lord willing, we'll talk to you next time.